In the current economic climate, many businesses are looking to maintain workforce flexibility and manage the associated costs. So it's perhaps no surprise that we are seeing increased use of workers that are not on the payroll. The tax risks posed by engaging what we call off-payroll labour, or OPL for short, have been with us for some time, and most are now familiar with the term IR35, given the number of high-profile IR35 tax cases now in the public eye. Dealing with OPL can be a complex and time-consuming process, which can generate significant financial risks. This presentation illustrates how BDO can help you manage your OPL compliance and minimise the risks its use can present. So just what is off-payroll labour? It includes any worker that your organisation engages, directly or indirectly, and as the name suggests, is paid outside of the payroll. This includes individuals supplied by an intermediary or agency, self-employed sole traders, a worker who supplies services via their own personal service company or PSC, and workers supplied by an umbrella company. There is a good deal of focus on IR35 and PSCs. In short, if IR35 applies, a PAYE and NIC liability arises on the payments made to the PSC. But before you can decide if you are liable, you have got to identify your PSC suppliers, and that can be a bit like finding a needle in a haystack. There are nearly 5.6 million businesses in the UK, 5 million of which have less than 5 employees. Somewhere within this group are, the government estimates, 230,000 PSCs, of which HMRC thinks 170,000 are at risk of being within IR35. So you've got to find the needle in the haystack, so to speak, not forgetting the other OPL categories that can also provide a PAYE and NIC risk. With the focus on IR35 and the risk posed by PSCs, it's easy to ignore the other elements of off-payroll labour that also pose a risk to engagers. So let's look at a typical risk curve. The IR35 risk can move from your organisation to an intermediary or agency if one is in the supply chain, but only if the correct procedures are followed. IR35 doesn't, however, apply to the self-employed, but that's because other legislation applies that poses a PAYE and NIC risk for engagers. For non-UK PSCs, the IR35 risk depends on the residency of the worker. Focusing back on IR35, it has been around for over 20 years, and as introduced, the legislation posed a PAYE and NIC risk to the worker running the PSC. However, unless the PSC is engaged by a small business, the risk has now shifted to the engager. This change has applied to public sector organisations since April 2017 and to medium and large businesses in the private sector from April 2021. The changes impact direct engagement of a PSC or a PSC engaged via an intermediary or agency. It's worth remembering HMRC uses the same employment status tests to decide whether a PAYE and NIC liability arises for all forms of OPL. We have developed a 3-stage strategy to identify, assess and manage your off-payroll risk. Our off-payroll risk management software identifies any supplier that may present an OPL risk. Once we have compiled a list of your at-risk suppliers, we can then assess the level of risk they pose, identifying whether PAYE and NIC should be deducted, and also manage the ongoing compliance of your off-payroll supplier population. This will help show that you are taking reasonable care, something HMRC considers to be a key element of the new rules, and also allows you to demonstrate compliance for the corporate criminal offence legislation and the senior accounting officer rules where applicable. So how do we do this? In a moment, we'll take a look at the OPRM process in detail. But first, in overview, the OPRM is software we've developed that takes your supplier data, analyses it against our bespoke databases and external data sources such as Companies House to match your supplier against the criteria that identify that supplier as a PSC, or alternatively, that they are definitely not PSCs. As we are looking at every supplier, you will have a complete audit trail. So we essentially remove the haystack to leave the needles, the PSCs and any other OPL suppliers you need to risk assess and manage. The data is presented in easy to read registers to give you the right information to allow you to make informed decisions about the level of risk you may face. Alternatively, this is a process that you can outsource to BDO. So let's see how the software works. Your supplier data is uploaded to our secure online portal where we can then analyse all of your supplier payments and generate a report file which shows the potential financial risk you may face. Our initial assessment breaks down your supplier population into those that do not present a risk and those that do. The at-risk suppliers are broken down further into supplier type, i.e. UK and offshore PSCs, self-employed suppliers and those working through intermediaries and agencies. The potential PAY and NIC liabilities are calculated per supplier and categorised by cost centre if those details can be provided. Our software can also be integrated into your onboarding process each time a new supplier is engaged. Once the analysis of your OPL suppliers has been completed, it's necessary to understand exactly where you fit within the supply chain, and our software will help you establish that and decide what actions are then necessary. You will need to issue status determination statements, or SDS, to each PSC or agency or intermediary if one exists in the supply chain. The SDS will explain whether IR35 applies or not in your assessment and tell the worker, either you or the agency, again if one is involved, whether PA1NC will be deducted or not. That is particularly important when an agency or intermediary is used, as the responsibility for PAY and NIC passes from your organisation to that entity, as long as you can demonstrate that you have applied reasonable care. Our software manages this for you, and should your IR35 assessment be appealed, there are time limits involved and it will manage this for you too. Thank you for listening to our presentation. Please get in touch if you'd like to know more about our off-payroll risk management process. You can use the dedicated email address shown on screen or speak to any existing BDO contact.